As we reflect on 2021's busy blur, are there clues about 2022? Let's ask Michael Harrison, publisher of Talkers Magazine, the trade publication of talk radio and TV and podcasters. Again this year, Michael is here to debut the Talkers 10, the 10 most talked about stories of the year. The 10th most talked about story of 2021, climate change, evident here in Washington as tourists find muddy walkways around the Jefferson and FDR and Martin Luther King memorials, and as the Smithsonian is moving the Star-Spangled Banner, Muhammad Ali's boxing gloves, the scripts from MASH, and other priceless pieces of the puzzle that is us out of flood-prone storage beneath the Museum of American History. In November, mind you, we had 3 tornadoes touch down in Rhode Island, where I live. Last time we had a tornado there was 1950. Wildfires out west are worse every season. Texas is braced for winter. Yet cable news and radio voices still call climate change a hoax. It's like that old Marx Brothers gag. Who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? Michael, aren't media climate change deniers risking their credibility?
Well, certainly they are. However, I find that most of them have modified their view over the past year to say that they see there is climate change, but what's not certain is how influential human activity has been in instigating climate change. It's the shift, the conversation has shifted to that because it is political. It does involve industry. It involves money. And thus it becomes politics. But there aren't that many deniers that there is climate change anymore. It's more, how's it being caused? And it gets into carbon emissions and the rest.
Yeah, every time I hear that hedge you describe, I expect to hear the sound effect of tap dancing in the background. The 9th most talked about topic of 2021 per Talkers research, crime and violence. Michael, there have always been long, hot summers, a term coined when you and I were young. Why is it worse now?
Well, we just had a long, hot summer. Again, back to the 2020 versus 2021. Was that the summer of 2020 or was that the summer of 2021 when we had race riots? And that has blurred together. So it has been particularly intense. This past, era has had, violence in the streets. But basically, the race issue is a part of it. And we'll talk about that as we move up the chart. The real issues are police reform versus police defunding. And that has gotten kind of murky in terms of the definition of those two terms.
Topic of the year number 8, USA-China relations. Michael, being one yourself, you know how radio talkers and their listeners tend to focus on domestic issues. How is it that Americans are now concerned about China?
Well, because the world is shrinking and cyberspace is local. And so much of the Chinese relationship to the U.S. is economic and has to do with the digital era. It is a domestic issue. Our relationship with China is not some war on the other side of the Pacific or some hazy, murky political situation that we don't fully understand. The relationship that we have with China affects each and every one of us in terms of our pocketbook.
Particularly as we have been Christmas shopping lately with these supply chain snafus and following the way that conservative talkers have tried to brand the coronavirus from Wuhan. Immigration reform was the 7th most talked about topic on talk radio and cable news this year. As Neil Diamond sang, they're coming to America. Michael, the left talks about cause and the right talks about effect. When you are hosting on talk radio, what are your callers saying?
Well, when I'm hosting on talk radio, most of the callers say whatever it is that station's political bent is, or the host I'm filling in for is in terms of his or her ideology. So it's not like it's a cross-section of the country. Almost all talk shows are inherently tilted or biased. That being said, the conservative point of view basically dominates, and there is concern about obvious crisis situations going on along the border. So it's not so much an esoteric ideological discussion as it's a real problem on a humanitarian level. And the only place that immigration is really being talked about is talk radio and talk television. You don't see that much about it in what's called the mainstream media, the mainstream press, whatever that is in 2021 going into 2022.
We are counting down the Talkers 10, the 10 most talked about topics of the year, with Talkers Magazine publisher Michael Harrison, himself a talker, hosting the Michael Harrison Wrap on Wonk FM here in Washington and on stations across the USA. Number 6 on the list is the First Amendment and social media. Michael, Donald Trump and others banned by social media platforms squawk about their First Amendment protections, but those only pertain to government suppression, correct?
Yes, but with the changes in technology, we have changes in sociology, and legislation often follows slowly behind. So it's like when the cars first went on the road, we had no traffic laws, we had no red lights, green lights, we had no motor vehicle bureaus, and we had to then catch up with all of it because people were crashing into each other on the highways or on the roads and running each other over. So we're trying to come up with a way of legislating the enormous influence that these big platforms have. So when major platforms are able to control something as precious as free speech, and it's the only game in town or a handful of games, it becomes an antitrust situation. It becomes a monopoly situation, and it affects the spirit of the First Amendment, if not directly the letter of the First Amendment.
You hinted about the 5th most talked about topic of the year. It's a perennial, race relations. How is this national conversation different now, Michael, than it was a year or two ago?
Well, as I mentioned before, it's tied into police reform, and it's tied into another topic that's coming up on our chart that I'll tell you about it when we get to it so as not to ruin the anticipation. But it changes with the circumstances in the news that affect race and this thing we call the Great Reckoning today between the races. Some people on the extremes say that everything is about race, that it's extreme one way or the other. And then there are those in the middle that feel we still have some type of systemic racism in America. Some of it is within the bounds of human nature, and you find it throughout the world and world history. And other things are unique to our country with its history of slavery that we're still not getting over here, so many years later. It's a complex issue, and it's a very, very real one, and it's a problem for our society. We have to eventually get ahead of it.
2021, topic number 4, voting legislation. No need to name names. One side wants to make it easier to vote. The other side wants to make it harder. They both accuse each other of cheating. And the congressional election map is going to look different in November. If you like the changes, it's called redistricting. If you don't, they're gerrymandered. Michael, if we've learned one thing in the last couple years, it's that anything could happen. But how likely do you think it is that the 2022 vote will not deliver the historically predictable congressional gains by the party not in the White House?
Yeah, well, first of all, the voting legislation is the other major issue that's driving conversation about race relations, because it's an extremely racial issue. It's black and brown people that those who are critical of voting legislation say are being hurt by it. In terms of how it's going to affect the next election, that depends upon something that we've learned in recent years. Inside political people have always known it, but I think the media and the general public are first becoming aware of the importance of voter turnout. And it's all going to come down to that in terms of what happens in 2022. If it's traditional, then the outside party will take over enough seats in Congress to change the balance. There's a very, very thin line, in the equation between the two parties, a couple of seats, and we have a whole different power structure in Congress and the Senate. So I'm not going to go out on a limb and predict it, but I will say that those that do so at their own peril.
turnout, and as Christine O'Donnell taught us a decade ago in Delaware, primaries. It's been nearly a year since the attempted assassination of the vice president by a mob in what became a deadly riot at the U.S. Capitol. The FBI is still tracking down insurrectionists, and deliberately, doggedly, the House Select Committee is serving subpoenas and chasing down those who no-show. Donald Trump has tried everything to avoid release of White House records leading up to and on that frightening day. And just recently, uniformed, masked white supremacist marchers showed up at the Lincoln Memorial chanting, "Reclaim America." Michael, was January 6th a story or the beginning of a story?
It was the culmination of a story, it was a story, and it was the beginning of a story. It was a major event along a timeline of left versus right politics, and the impact, for good or bad, depending upon where you stand politically, and we are a divided country, and I'm trying to explain this on behalf of all sides where they stand, a lot of it has to do with where you stand on Donald Trump and his influence on the American political system.
The second most talked about topic of 2021 hits us every day in every way, the economy. Michael, there's pain at the pump, yet we're having a very green Christmas and the stock market is booming. Give me some adjectives to describe the talk radio callers you hear as regards the economy.
Uncertainty, a roller coaster ride. You have to have a cast iron stomach to be involved in anything having to do with the economy. Fear of inflation. What is that going to do to my nest egg? What's that going to do to the value of my house? What do I do about it in terms of where do I put my money?
There's a lot of surmise out there. Unsurprisingly, the story of the year is what may be the story of our lifetime, COVID. Michael, several notable casualties have been our brothers in the talk radio family who were outspoken anti-vaxxers. We wish people were more skeptical about what's on social media, but if you hear it on radio or if you see it on TV, it must be true. Do media coronavirus deniers imperil the public?
Anybody who is deceptive or engages in deceit for political reasons, or what I call the daily dance of affirmation, telling people what they want to hear for political reasons, they imperil the public. And it's not just the coronavirus or the pandemic, it's everything.
As you and I have made a living saying for several decades, stay tuned. Michael Harrison, Talkers.com. Thanks again for stepping into the big picture as you have done every year at this time, and Happy New Year.